Well, what you're trying to achieve is to reduce the complexity of the infrastructure. If you think of traditional DR and backup, especially from the DR space, you take a physical box, you go to your boss and you say, we need another box because we're going to put it at the DR site. Then we have to go away and think about how we keep the two in sync. What if we make physical hardware changes to box A? Does it mean we have to go to the DR site and make the same physical change to the copy box at the other site? What if we change cards or we change BIOS? We have to work out how to do that, right? Then what is the recovery process? Have we got a documented process? Yes. It's usually very complex when I go to most customers. Have we got a bunch of scripts that we recover and we use to do recovery? Yes. Who wrote them? Bob in the corner over there. What happens if Bob leaves? We don't know because none of us can script in Perl or none of us are C programmers or whatever language he's wrote the scripts in. So immediately then starts to cast doubt over the validity of the actual BCP solution you've put in. And certainly those kind of things get picked up by auditors when they go around looking for compliance now. And we're all, in every industry that we work in, we're all being hit harder and harder now with regulations. You must be able to fail over to the data center. You must be able to demonstrate you can do it. You must be able to produce reports. Those are the kind of things that they drill into very quickly, because if they see a heavily scripted solution, they'll immediately start saying, what if this person leaves? What if you haven't got anybody that can modify that script? Does that mean your plan's now, and you may fail the audit? So people came to us a few years ago, and I used to go out and write these scripts, and they said, well, the scripts that you wrote are great, and they work, but we need an off-the-shelf solution that works because we don't want to have to rely on having somebody in the team permanently with the skills to do this. So when we look at the other aspect of this, when we went out and spoke to customers a few years ago, the other thing which was the major pain for everybody was the amount of successful tests that they do. And probably most customers in the meeting would not really admit to the true amount of failures that they had. And they normally came out in the bar afterwards. Say, do you want to go to the bar and have a quick drink and have a chat after the work's done? And then after a pint or two, they would say, actually, when I told you that only 1 in 4 tests fails, it actually is only 1 in 4 succeeds. And normally, that's on a good year. So just keep that quiet, but we don't often report that back to the business because we've kind of got away with it so far. What we need is a solution that lets us test more frequently. And more importantly, we'd like a solution that lets us test while we're at work without having to come in on a weekend, because that doesn't go down well with anybody. So this is kind of where the whole solution came from, because customers could see that they could move the virtual machines around quite easily, and they could do that at the storage layer, and they could see that at the storage layer they could copy things very easily and very quickly. So they've started to see that they've got now building blocks to maybe do some kind of non-disruptive testing. So this is where kind of the site recovery managed solution grew. But what do you need to make it work? So the first thing is, not everybody is in the fortunate position of being on a greenfield project where you can go out with a blank check to all of the vendors and you can sit there and all the sales guys will take you out and they'll be wined and dined and how much do you want to spend? Not everybody's in that situation to just go out and buy a load of new servers, buy a load of new SAN arrays. So the key aspect is hardware independence. You might only have budget to buy a few new servers or no new servers, so you're going to have 2 different server types at each site. With virtualization, that's not a problem because the virtual machines don't care what the hardware is above them. As long as that hardware can run the VMware hypervisor, then the virtual machines will boot up and start under that operating system. So you could have Dell at one side, you could have HP at the other, you could have IBM at one side, you could have somebody else at the other, Fujitsu servers at the other, you could have Blades at one side, rack mounts at the other. Virtual machines won't care. They won't care because they're encapsulated in files on the storage. So everything you need to move that virtual machine around, the OS, the application is inside a file on the SAN somewhere, or the shared disk array. And if you kind of want to get your head around that concept, if you've never seen it before, if you go home tonight and download one of the free VMware kind of desktop type products that allow you to do virtualization on your laptop or your PC at home, and you create a virtual machine on your PC at home and you create a Windows VM for your kids to use, then you'll see that if you give that Windows 7 VM a 20 gig disk, somewhere on the hard drive of your PC, you'll find a 20 gig file. And the same concept applies to the data center. You'll find on the SAN a 20 gig file. Or you might find multiple files if the virtual machine's got multiple disks. But those are essentially the virtual machine in a single file. Now obviously, SANs are a little bit more advanced than the kind of stuff that we use at home. They can now start to replicate those devices anywhere that you want to replicate them to. Partitioning, consolidation, and resource pooling. So more and more now, customers are moving away from this idea of a lights-out data center. It's not often now that I go to sites where they say, yeah, we just buy the same amount of kit for the DR site, and basically we just leave it sitting there. No, more and more, we want to run the DR site as an active site. We're actually going to promote the DR site to be a production site. We're going to move all the dev test and UAT workloads to that site. We're going to run them there. Can we do that? Will SRM allow us to do that? Yes, it will. If we do failovers, SRM can, power down virtual machines at that site. It can, orchestrate the power back on after the tests have finished. So you can really start to kind of share resources across both sites now. So, what we're trying to achieve, eliminate hardware dependencies, reduce the infrastructure requirements, and turn the recovery site into a productive resource. So all of this, is possible, and people are doing this today. I was with a customer yesterday that said to me, yeah, we that SRM stuff you put in for us. So, it was kind of put me on the spot a bit because I did put that one in for them. So it was kind of one of those meetings where you don't know what the customer's got a deadpan face, and I was waiting for him to say it didn't work. Luckily, he said it did work very well, and we're really happy. So it was kind of under the table. Thank God for that. But he kind of said, well, there was a situation where we thought we had our networks made resilient north and south of Thames. And it turned out that we'd crossed the cables over in the data center. So actually what happened is when Southeast Water went through the cables, we suddenly realized that the cables were the wrong way around because we lost connectivity to site A and everything went down. So if it hadn't been for the fact that we had the SRM solution in, we wouldn't have been able to fail back to the other site because we didn't have a DR plan before then. So they'd basically used it in anger and actually managed to, their recovery site, which is also a production site, was now running both data center capacity. And they could do that side by side. But when you start to, it's very easy to get sucked into talking about DR and thinking about how wonderful it is and we can now move workloads to other sites. But, DR is not a replacement for backup. Backup will always have a place in any infrastructure, whether that be, backups that you just keep locally or backup solutions that you also replicate to the DR site. So the other big challenge when you're working on the DR project or you're looking to virtualize is also consider how you're going to back up these virtual machines. There are lots of different solutions on the market. Solution that we introduced in vSphere is something called the VMware Data Recovery, VMware VDR, and that's something you get for free with vSphere, so it's part of the platform. So if you're an existing customer that's already got an enterprise backup solution by one of the big vendors, then you're not forced to use this. But if you're a new customer that hasn't got a backup solution from any of the vendors that integrate with VMware, then one of the big gaps that we had for a lot of years is they said to us, you should have something built in that we can use because otherwise we have to go off and evaluate all these different products and we haven't decided yet what we need to do backups from day one. We can't have in the project plan a gap that says we won't have backups for 6 months because we need to go and look at backup vendors that work with virtualization and choose which one. So VDR is targeted specifically at that market. So if you're on the larger end of the scale in terms of numbers of virtual machines and ESX hosts, you're more likely to be using something like Symantec Net Backup, Tivoli TSM, and you're going to be working with what we call the VMware Consolidated Backup Framework. How does data recovery work? It essentially, I'll just build the slide out rather than go through the animations. It essentially works in an agentless way. It can do disk-based backups of the VMs. It can do full virtual machine backups. And what do we mean by full? So there's two different types of backups you need to think about with a virtual machine. You need to back up the virtual machine image, so that's everything. So the virtual machine config and also the data on top. And then once you've got the copy of the image in the inventory, then from that point onwards, most customers will normally be doing incrementals and deltas, potentially of just the file system inside the operating system they're running. Why is it important to have the images? Well, as one of my customers found out in Central Europe, they entrusted their backup solution to a third party. They never actually put them to the test to see if they could do recovery. They just, this backup vendors have been working with us for years, doing physical stuff for us. They know what they're doing. They went off and did it. They then, unfortunately, suffered a SAN outage and then said to the backup vendor, all right, let's recover all the VMs. Right, the SAN's come back, but we lost the SAN completely, and they didn't have replicated DR in place. SAN vendor went, yeah, okay, right, we've got your 2,000 VMs here. Right, what do we restore them to? And the guys just looked at me and went, well, what do you mean, what do we restore them to? You pull the image out first, and that recreates all the virtual machines for us at a construct level, so we got their names and the disks, and then you take the file system things and you put them in there. We only backed up the file systems. Right, so we've got 2,000 VMs that we've got to now try and remember what they were called, what networks they're connected to, and how they went. So it's important to think about both things, because when you had a physical box, it was physically stood there. When you've got a virtual machine, it's virtually stood there. So you back up the full virtual machine, that copies all your inventory information, and then from that point onwards, you back up the incrementals or deltas of the file systems. You may periodically take a new image backup. As things change in production, you might change the config of the VM. You don't need to back them up every week, because generally when you're in production, your virtual machine image isn't going to change that often, but the data inside it will. So again, make sure that you've tested your backup procedure end-to-end just as thoroughly as you'll see in a minute when we get into the DR piece, that you would test the DR piece end-to-end.